Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Songwriters on Process podcast. My name is Benno Papari, and since 2010, I've run the Songwriters on Process website, where you can find more than 200 conversations with songwriters about the creative process. I'm not here to talk about tour stories, band drama, how a band got its name, or favorite foods. My goal is to treat songwriters as writers, plain and simple. This is an intelligent conversation about the writing process between two writers. And today's interview is with Sara Watkins of Nickel Creek. This is the second time I've interviewed Watkins. The first time was 10 years ago in 2013. And so I always like to go back and revisit those interviews and see if the artists have any updating they'd like to do to their process. Surely the process has changed over 10 years. I know mine has. So I always like to kind of check those answers and see what those people, see if they're doing anything differently now. More about that in a moment. First, Nickel Creek has a new album coming out March 24th called Celebrants, and it is the first new album in 9 years. And their first single is called Holding Pattern, and it's a great song. I'm very excited for this new album. But back to Watkins. That was the plan, just to kind of talk about those things. I mean, a little bit, those things that she used to do, see if they changed. But I scrapped all that. This was a conversation that I loved. We didn't talk about the process and the nitty gritty. I think there's a few questions, but this was really about why we write, why we create, what writing does to us, how it makes us feel, the urge to write. And in that, it was a deep conversation about the emotional process behind writing. And again, what it does to us. We talked a little bit about pens and papers but I kind of threw out the questions I was going to ask and found this to be truly a conversation about creativity, not so much about the particulars of the process. And wow, I love this. I think my favorite conversations are those that I finish and I learn something about myself. And I did in this one for sure. I think you'll really enjoy this. There was a lot of just deep conversation again about, why Watkins creates and what it does and the urge and the impact it has on her. So anyway, a different kind of conversation, but I loved it. I could have gone on for hours and had to, of course, stop because we couldn't talk for hours, but there was a lot we didn't get to, but that was fine. I think if you're an artist of any stripe, not just a songwriter, this will appeal to you. This really deep dive into the human urge to create. Anyway, with that, again, Nickel Creek's new album, first album out in 9 years, called Celebrants, comes out March 24th. If you want to see my old interview with Watkins, and that's just transcribed, it's not a podcast, I'll link to that on the site. And with that, here is my interview with Sara Watkins of Nickel Creek. I was listening to an interview. I don't know if you saw that interview with or heard about it with Bruce Springsteen and Howard Stern like a month or two ago. And Howard Stern asked him, he asked Springsteen, do you write every day? And he said, no, because sometimes I have nothing to say. And I thought that was interesting that someone as prolific as that would say, yeah, I don't write every day. Sometimes I have nothing to say. Why force it? So I'm curious where you stand on that. Do you think it's important to create in some fashion every day, whether it's, well, I guess two-part question. Do you think it's important to write every day or not?
It's not important for me to write every day. But I tend to write in spurts or in seasons. And so, Bruce Springsteen and I have a lot in common because sometimes I also don't have things to say. I have become increasingly aware that I need time between growth periods and development periods to rest. And this year I have been calling it wintering, and I've been hearing, and it's funny because I don't remember hearing anybody saying that, but since I've identified it as wintering, I've heard that, there's like books called wintering. There's like, it's a big part of the conversation. And my friend Holly was saying the other night but she feels like that's something that has been in the ether a lot more this last couple years. And I think that probably is true. It's kind of a common need in the rhythm of our lives. And I'm just starting to identify it. It's always been a part of my writing process where I will just exist and be and live my life. And then at some point there becomes a bit of an irritant or a need to dig a little bit. And that's when I start writing. And a lot of times the writing, I'll be like, okay, it's more just like I need to, if we stay with the earth metaphor, which is my favorite metaphor, it's kind of like, like aerating the soil a little bit so that I can absorb life in a way that and experience and like the writing is like bearing witness to what I'm experiencing. And it's almost like it lets me know that I'm at a place where I want to absorb a little bit more and work through something and process, because I can tell that there's some growth that needs to happen. And that often happens through writing.
So when you're wintering, are you deliberately not writing, or are you taking things in by, journaling?
I'm not pushing myself to write. I'm not worrying about it, and I'm not stressing out about being productive, quote unquote productive, because I think for me to be productive, it requires rest.
So deliberately, you say, so how do you know when you just said it's an irritant, but is it maybe something will happen externally where you say, I've got to write about this? I'm really curious about this, about when you kind of actually, how do you know when that time has come, I guess?
It's like an urge that I feel. And, you know how you feel before you have to throw up? How you can you feel like a rumble.
Yeah.
You feel like a little bit of an or a little bit of a what's going on. And that's kind of what it feels like in my heart, in my sternum, my body a little bit. And it's not like, oh, I have to write. I really resist trying being dramatic about it, because I would get it out some other way. But writing is what I do. And writing is the way that I've learned to process things. And so that's how I do it. And so when I feel that feeling, I'm not a runner. I don't start training. I'm not I don't know, an athlete or whatever other jobs people do. But what I do is I go inward and try to figure out what I'm feeling, why I'm feeling it. And through that self-examination, generally, I might have told you this before, but generally I find that my favorite songs are the ones that resonate to me personally. And that I feel like could also, they resonate as coming from me. I feel like they would also resonate going to me. And I also feel like it's, that there's a greater message almost like from God or the earth or universe or whatever you call it, if it works 2 or 3 ways, it's a good sign, I think.
So when you feel that I guess bubbling coming up, to write, do you immediately go to songs? Is it journaling? Is it just writing? What form does that take? I get to those words take.
It's usually just prose, just pages and pages of stream of conscious, and it's my, I guess a lot of writers talk about it as a therapy, where it's just you just start figuring out what's inside of you. And sometimes there can be a trend or certain words in the past. Like when I was writing Young in All the Wrong Ways, which was an album that came out in, I think, 2017. Or 16. But when I was writing that album, I found myself writing like 2 or 3 pages of run-on sentences. And then at the end, a couple of times I had noticed after the fact that I might come to a sentence where it's like this or this or this. Or it's like, I feel young in all the wrong ways or whatever it is. And then I'd be like, oh, that's interesting. What is that? And a lot of times that would be a starting place for figuring out what that irritant is inside my body or what it is, where it's coming from. And then from there, hopefully expanding it in a way that other people relate to, or that feels a little bit more universal.
So when people journal, typically journaling is an end to itself, right? They're not journaling with an idea of, oh, this will become, some essay or memoir or something like that. So, but when it sounds like you're journaling,
Ideally.
yeah, right. Is it hard not to be, how can I say this, like self-conscious because you're journaling with the idea that, oh, this may become a song? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that if I sit down and I start to write with the idea of like, this is going to rhyme, it goes nowhere, right? Because I could be guessing wrong. I'm like, just like going to like, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and I find my A-B rhyme or whatever it is, and I stick with it. And then like a stanza and a half in, I'm like, what if I picked the wrong rhythm? Like, what if I just like guessed wrong? Or what if I'm just doing this default thing? And then I'm worried about all these other inconsequential issues. So the reason that I like to start without necessarily putting the song format on it is because I don't, a lot of times rhythms or phrases or even rhymes will reveal themselves in a way that's more that I can just kind of observe them and not have to feel like I'm making something. And so it like a lot of times those pages turn into nothing. And I really try to not think about it as like, oh, this might be good. I might be onto something. Like, it's very tempting sometimes to be like, oh, I can feel that I'm like to lose sense of just the presence of moment and to fly out from my body and be like, ooh, she's writing this. I haven't done this in a while. Maybe It's going to be, I might be like the beginning of a album cycle. And then where would I, like, it can get so unproductive so quickly once I step out of that present moment. So it does take a little bit of discipline to be like, no, I'm here on the page. This is what I'm here for, solving this. And a lot of times I'll step away for like a day and come back to read it, to then examine a little bit with some clarity and a little bit of objective thought. But I try not to immediately start examining it or mining it for like ideas or hooks or something. Because I do feel that for me, that the end goal is not to write songs. The end goal is to figure out my stuff.
Yeah.
So I do love to write songs and stuff, but it's truly the end goal is to figure out how to be me and how to not, how to work through stuff. And so it's really nice when that does turn into a song. But I try to give myself the space to be a person first, and then almost reapproach it as a songwriter after a day.
I love that. That's a great, yeah. So you said a day. I mean, I'm a big fan of distance too. Unfortunately, when I write something and I come back, I rarely say, oh my gosh, that's amazing. It's always, oh my God, I can't believe I wrote that.
Yeah.
But right. I mean, and I don't know what that is, but I firmly believe in distance as crucial to, like, I'm a prose writer, not a songwriter, but is crucial to my writing process, because the worst time to revise or edit is after you've just done that thing. So the more distance I have, the better, right? So,
it's also a way of not wasting creative time, because like you said, like in the moment, it seems brilliant. And like, if I wrote something and poured my heart onto the page, and in like halfway through, I was like, this is good. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to just like go straight in and dig all the way. And then I immediately reapproach it and try and write it. 100%. I'm going to look back. I'm going to have spent like 2 hours on this thing. I'm going to look back and be completely mortified and embarrassed and worse, just like annoyed, annoyed that at my lack of taste in that moment, which is like, what big deal? Like I spent time working on it. There's no loss really. Everything's a gain when you're working, but I prefer to, I think the space ultimately is more, when I want to be productive, that space is, helpful.
And here's I've also noticed about myself, because I'm big on me. I mean, I'm big on recognizing, being conscious of what works and what doesn't, and what I've noticed about myself recently is that, so if I finish something at like, let's say in the morning, and I look at it 12 hours later in the evening, I'm not nearly as critical as if I finished it at night, slept, and woke up the next morning. There's something about sleep where I'm able to go, I wake up the next morning and I can cut 200 words like that. But if it's the same day, I want to hang on to it. And I feel like, well, I wrote it. Obviously, it should belong there. But I don't know what it is about sleep, about maybe a reset, that gets me to be far more of an aggressive, and I think in a better way, reviser of my writings. So
you're a slightly different person after the sleep, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the objectivity of like almost what a stranger or an editor would have. Like you're slightly changed.
Yeah. Do you find that, I don't know, has it ever happened to you where maybe just that, because you're giving it a day anyway, but I feel like there's something about that same day revision where I'm not nearly as comfortable getting rid of things.
Totally. I definitely experienced that for sure.
Is there an ideal emotion when you tend to get your best writing done? Do you tend to shut down when you're, maybe extremes of happiness or sadness? Is there kind of an ideal emotion where you're most productive?
Interesting. Curiosity. I think curious is the most important thing. Because that's a direction. And happy is like stagnant, sad is stagnant. Curiosity is, I'm not sure if that's even an emotion, but it's a way of being that implies a future, implies development, and or maybe it assumes a future. It assumes development. It assumes learning, growth, and the great potential that you've been mistaken and that you can adjust course. And so there's a story in there. There's a there's a journey. There's a story in there. And I think that when I'm the self that I like the best, I'm curious. When I enter conversations with curiosity, there's no defensiveness in there. There's no attacking in there. It's just, it's potential for wonder and learning and like giddy joy and delight. There's potential for surprise. There's very little potential for surprise when I'm being defensive or if I'm just feeling sad or mad about something. Very little potential for surprise or delight or growth even. And curiosity is propelling.
So from a practical perspective, songwriters tell me that all of you have just phones filled with voice memos and lines. And I just get so anxious because I think, how do you go back? And is there any sense of organization to those voice memos? So I guess the question is, do you have voice memos? And if you do, are you doing anything except scrolling and saying, where is that one that from a couple of weeks ago?
I identify them. I find that sometimes I'll speak into my phone if I'm driving. or if I just don't have a pen and paper and I don't want to thumb my way through a note, I definitely prefer writing with a pen. But I think speaking is also very helpful because it reminds me, hearing my voice reminds me how I was feeling when those words came to me. And a lot of times if I'm just typing it into my notes folder, I completely forget the context. But when I'm using my voice memo and I'm just speaking into it, I remember like where I was in the car, where I was, what I was thinking, or sometimes I'll be listening to the radio and I'll like record a voice memo of if there's like a song playing and it's some like there's some groove or something and I'll like sing something over it or something like that. And that's may or may not be used, but it's fun to have those little light up moments of inspiration. And when I'm like practicing and writing and actually like get a snippet down and I like have something deliberately like with an instrument, or from just singing, if I can, assuming I'm not driving, I will I'll write down like voice or lyric melody idea and or instrument like guitar, detuned guitar idea or fiddle melody or whatever. And sometimes I'll even specify what project I think it might fit. Like an I'm With Her idea or a Nickel Creek idea. It might be specific just because that's the project that's coming up. So that's what I'm thinking of. Or it could be that like there are some things in my phone that I'm definitely saving for I'm With Her because I feel like it just feels like something that the girls and I would be able to really get a lot out of. Not that it wouldn't work with Nickel Creek, but some things just feel like they might have a little bit of a special home.
I just realized
most of my ideas don't have a special home. Most of my things are just like, hey, what do you want? There's a bunch of stuff I have on my phone that I haven't used yet. What do you like? But sometimes, occasionally, it's like, oh, this would be good for Nickel Creek or I'm With Her or something.
I was going to ask you, since we talked 10 years ago, if you wanted to update your answer, but 10 years ago, you said you're resolutely a pen and paper person, not a computer person when it comes to lyrics. So it sounds like you're still there, right?
I mean, it is my favorite, but I have it around less and less. And so I do end up using my phone more. I think when I find myself in a writing mode, I will have a pen and paper with me more.
Yeah.
But in these periods where I'm not in that, I don't find myself in that headspace on a daily basis, I'll just use what I have. Like a phone is typically that. And then once there feels like, and I feel an urge to kind of start writing, I'll re-examine those, find some things that seem to be resonating with my soul, and maybe dedicate them to a notebook and kind of start a bulk of writing in one physical place that I'll probably lose and have to start over. But that's all part of it, I guess.
Now, are you particular to color of ink, type of pen, type of notebook? I mean, no, not at all. I mean, listen, I've always said I could start a whole website dedicated to just that brand loyalty and color that songwriters have. It's crazy. I
have a pen that I enjoy, and I have paper that I enjoy, but there's if I like require something, it's too much pressure. It's almost like the crappier the tools, the more scrappy and honest it feels or something. I enjoy writing with things, but with like a nice pen, but it's, I can't put that pressure on it because that would surely make me feel like I had to do like quote unquote great writing, No, I gotta use the Holiday Inn pen that I haven't lost for 15 years. That is like almost out of ink.
But I feel like then you're almost saying it's got to be a crappy pen, So it's almost like, yeah. I mean,
no, I that's not lost on me. However, I have way more crappy pens than I do nice pens, so it's just less of a deal. It's just I'm open to having a nice pen. Truth is, I don't have many. So I just I try to not get hung up on those kinds of things.
And I have heard songwriters tell me they've written, and something you said, I forgot who it was recently, exactly what you said, and that is the crappier the paper, the less it feels like I'm writing a song, and the more it feels like, oh, these are just ideas I'm writing down, and it lessens the pressure. I've heard backs of utility bills, things like that it, as a way, like you said, to kind of make it, to take the pressure out, the burden of songwriters. So I'm just going to jot some ideas down. Oh, look at that. It's actually a song. So
I think there is a little bit of like effort, or maybe effort's not the right word, but there's an awareness and a desire to not get caught up in the performative aspects when you're in the creative process. And if I have a nice pen and a brand new notebook, I imagine myself sitting down on the table, having beautiful penmanship, which I've never had.
Drinking tea with your
drinking tea. Immediately, right. I turn into like Anne of Green Gables or something, and I'm like writing these beautiful poems with like nothing in the margins and no scraps, no scribbles, and it's just like perfect. And immediately, I get into this outside picture of myself. And my goal, if I find myself writing, is to do everything I can to just stay in the moment, stay in my body, not get distracted by anything performative, and just, in a meditative kind of state, like acknowledge that is a part of me, but I'm here for this right now, and just try to stay present.
You said something earlier that I agree with 100%. And so when I was a professor, all the rage when I was in graduate school was teaching students how to free write. And free writing was this idea that, you write for 5 minutes, pen never leaves paper, and you don't stop writing. So if you can't think of anything to write, you actually are writing, I can't think of anything to write. So you keep on writing. So the idea is that eventually, I guess you'll have some like Freudian breakthrough and all the ideas will just, pour forth. Well, after a while, they realized that students weren't giving people better ideas. They were just giving them a greater number of really crappy ideas, because on some level, that idea that's in your brain, as it goes down your fingers and leaves your fingertips or whatever, it changes. And so because at some point, like, you're really not, those words that are leaving, are coming from your pen, aren't really from your brain. There is some filter as they travel down the arms. And that's why, when I, like, same thing with you, like when I find that I'm in a rut, I will just talk things out, because speech is pretty amazing. Think about this. I have no idea what I'm going to say to you in 5 seconds. Speech involves no forethought. And whereas writing, on some level, it is deliberate. We're not just spewing forth these ideas, but with speech, we don't stop and think. You're not thinking to yourself, how am I going to answer Ben? Somehow the answers are just coming, but with writing, it's different. So I think I agree with you so much. You said this earlier, just about about how talking things out makes it feel different. But I think that's why, because we do have that filter when we write, no matter how much people say that they don't.
That's really, that filter, is that just secondary thought that happens, like between your head and your pen?
Well, I have what I think are sometimes pretty good sentences in my head, but somehow as they travel down my arms, they don't look anything like they did in my brain. And that's why, but don't we say to people all the time, like, if you're struggling with something, talk it out. And when I was a professor, I would tell my students, they'd write something that doesn't make sense. And I'll say, what are you trying to say? And they'll tell me, and I'll go, write that down. You just said it.
I think that's the beauty of co-writing too. Like that's the experience with that I've had when I, it's very common to like start a song with an idea and then get into like, you get it through the first verse and chorus, and the second verse you start, and then we're like, what? Inevitably somebody's like, what are we trying to say? What are we trying to say here? Because you get caught up with like rhymes and weird and connecting metaphors and all of that, and it's very easy to lose the intent, the original intent or pivot intent, because you've realized that there's an option that looks more appealing, and or maybe there's more potential in a different option of subject. And so, I mean, like, I am vividly remembering a time when with Nickel Creek recently, we were working on this song called Strangers. No, it's called Stone's Throw. Stone's Throw, right? Which Sean had started. And we'd had a ton of music already arranged from previous meetups. And we were really trying to just figure out the lyrics. And it took us a while to work. It was like a day and a half. We were at this house in Los Angeles, our friend's house, writing. And it took us a day and a half of sorting through, like, what are we trying to say? Like, how does that work? Like, adjusting the first verse, and then, figuring out how to get where we wanted to go so that we could figure out how to get there. And talking it out was crucial for us to get a full picture with, 3 verses and the development that we wanted. And that was a really repeated phrase for us. Like, what do we want to say it, and then figure out ways to make it work in the context of the format that you've developed.
We make fun of people, there's this, and I'm sure, I never watched Mad Men, but I'm sure there's images of these, like, people staring out their windows.
It's quite good.
Yeah, I know. One of these people, I'm like lost. And I know there's certain things I haven't, like, I've never read Harry Potter, that I feel like I've lost out in the cultural, the zeitgeist. But, people who are staring out their windows with their 1950s era dictaphone dictating entire documents. And when we think that that's old fashioned, but that's exactly what we're talking about, isn't it? It's, when dictation in any form can be valuable, because to me, it just lessens the, there's no filter. We don't stop.
And when we think about, sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
Like what we're doing what the picture that you just painted, you're walking around and you're looking outside. You're looking at the clouds. You're looking at how the wind is blowing through people's scarves on the sidewalk. You're noticing things, but you're still free to think. You're not noticing keys on a typewriter or a computer typewriter because of Mad Men. You're not noticing how much empty space there is on your page. You're noticing life, and it frees up your brain in a way. And I feel like that's another advantage to talking it out. You're not distracted by the lack. You're just seeing what is, like, the fullness of everything else that's around you. And you're able to, it almost frees you up to observe your thoughts more clearly, I think.
You get ideas, because I've heard this a lot from songwriters, getting ideas through when they do mundane activities. And by mundane, I mean truly mundane, doing the dishes, gardening, vacuuming. There's something about, the subconscious is able to emerge when our brains are just kind of occupied with an activity that requires no brain activity. I've heard that so much. Maybe it's in the past couple of years, people have been indoors and they've done more of those indoor hobbies. But wow, the stories people tell me, if I got this great idea as I was vacuuming, anything like that. So how often does it happen to you? Not when you're consciously observing, but when you're doing something unconscious.
It's a big part of it. And I think that's a huge part of why I work in seasons, because that it in those downtimes, I'm allowed the repetition, the monotonous repetition of tending to my life in a way that allows me to observe observe the consistencies so that I can acknowledge the inconsistencies. Or maybe it's, I'm just speculating here, but like, maybe it's when, when everything is in turmoil, I'm thinking about if a wind came through this room right now and everything was blowing around and it was just a dust storm, there would be no way to do anything but survive. But when there is enough order, I'm able to tend to what chaos is there, or observe it, or appreciate it, or respect it, and then wonder about things and be curious about things. There's the safety of the repetition is the privilege that allows for the curiosity. For me, if I'm not feeling safe, in at least enough foundational aspects of my life that I just feel like I'm just surviving emotionally, I'm not going to be writing. I'll write about it after, when it's over, or when I have a solid foot on the ground and a hand on the tree or something, and I'll be able to take stock and sort through things. But when I think that, that's probably part of why those monotonous things, those are grounding, and those are times when we can think about the things that are more challenging in our life.
I'm going to read a quote. I love this quote, and I think you alluded a little bit to this earlier, by the novelist E.L. Doctorow. He said, "Writing is like driving at night. You can only see as far as the headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way." And I love that, because as a writer, when I write, I don't think I have any right knowing what it's supposed to look like at the end. Because I think when you do that, you're too rigid. You're not willing to kind of explore other places. But I love that quote, that you can only see as far as the headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way. I just think that's one of my favorite writing quotes of all time. I always think about that.
I love that. I mean, I think that resonates with my feelings about curiosity, and how important that is. I feel like as a kid, when I was growing up, it felt like certain people just knew everything. They knew the beginning and the end, almost in this godlike way, this omniscient kind of like, you figured it out. And that seemed like the goal, that someday I would just know everything. I would just know how things were supposed to go. I would have had enough experience, or read enough, or, just done enough that I would just know. And, there's a lot to be said for experience, but I think there's a lot more to be said for the curiosity, because, as we age, we learn that that's not actually true. That perception is a childlike perception. But truly, my favorite people to be around, my favorite people to be creative around, are the kind of people who are like optimistic about what something could mean. Optimistic in general. My dad said something to me that was really impactful, has been really impactful to me at several times in my life, about not that, just that it was a lesson in momentum and the physics of our lives, in that if you stop, it takes way more energy to start up again than it does if you just keep going a little bit, little by little. You can pivot. And when something, if like this doesn't have to do with this need to constantly move and do, because that's not how, I don't think how he meant it. It more has to do with a paralyzing fear that might come over us at one point or another. And in those moments, to not let it freeze us up to a point where we are actually paralyzed, but instead to just very slowly keep moving in a way that when you're confused, you can pivot, you can turn. Like, if you imagine a ship on the water, if it's not going anywhere, the wind's just going to blow it wherever it wants to go, wherever the wind is blowing. But if the ship has forward momentum, and if it knows how to use its sail, it can move ever so slightly to the right or the left. And that doesn't mean that it's going to always be going to the left. It's just helping it move forward. And I have found that, and this, I think I'm bringing this up because of the optimism of just moving forward. And that could be, in a depressive state, that could just mean like getting up out of bed, or it could be in a relationship, just taking tiny steps and knowing that you can pivot, but just moving forward. Or it could be in the context of looking for something to be hopeful about, finding those tiny things to be hopeful about, and those tiny things to be curious about. For me, a lot of times that's nature. And it's like laying on the ground looking at moss or an ant or whatever. And I think those are moments that can very quickly propel me into wonder and propel me into a delight. And I find myself like my favorite people to work with are these people who identify delight in the simplicities of things, and therefore are also open to being big time surprised by impactful art or impactful words or phrases or a meal or beauty in these tiny ways. You can see it in the tiny ways. You can see it in much bigger ways. And I think that's something that I've identified in the people that I most love to collaborate with, because they inspire that way of being in me. If I'm feeling like wooden inside, it reminds me of how to, let the moss grow a little bit more on me and participate in that perspective.
I hear a lot of overlap between your definition of curiosity and optimism. That's what I kept on thinking. Like, those things are, I've never thought about that before, but they're linked. I mean, if you're curious, that's kind of optimism, isn't it? I mean, you're thinking about the possibilities. I don't know. I heard you talk about both things, but I thought, gosh, there's so many similarities. So it makes sense that you're attracted. That's an ideal emotion for you to get your best writing done, but you like working with people who are optimistic, because I don't know how you can be curious and not be optimistic, right?
That's how I feel.
Yeah.
I mean, it implies if you're looking toward a future, you're curious about what the possibility might be. That's a willingness to be surprised. It's a willingness to see something that you haven't experienced yet, or to feel something you haven't experienced yet. And I think optimism gets a really bad rap sometimes. Mm-hmm. Because it can feel dumb. It can not feel dumb. It can sound or be understood as ignorance, willful ignorance, and a preference toward not seeing the world as it is. And I think I lean optimistic. When I was a kid, I definitely felt very optimistic, but it was anchored in things that I'm not necessarily anchored in anymore. And for a while, I felt myself curious about whether or not I could have optimism while developing my grown-up individual thoughts and feelings about how I think about the world. And I am finding my way back into it in a way that I really enjoy, in a way that feels very authentic and not blind and not lazy. It feels like feels important to me. And and not necessarily always easy, but it feels important, and it feels the things that I love, the things that I enjoy have a life to them that I again, like, I keep coming back to this curiosity. And I'm really enjoying that this stage of my life where I'm sort of like, I guess I'm just thinking about it now. I'm speaking very 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 in the moment, because I haven't really thought about this in a while. But it feels real. It feels good, and it feels authentically me. And I feel like there will be after this period of wintering, I feel like it's gonna leave me with some things to say.
So my last question, or I guess my last comment is, I interviewed the poet Lee Young Lee. This is like 10 years ago. He's one of my favorite poets. And you mentioned how, getting a sense of wonder from nature, from mundane activities and things like that. And he said, and this is why he's a poet and I'm not, but he said that when he gets up in the morning, he sees the outline of his body and his wife's body in the bed sheets. I just see rumpled bed sheets that need to be made, but he looks at that bed sheet, and he looks at the bed, and he sees the outline of their bodies after they get up. And that just blew my mind, because I thought that's just another level of wonderment, of curiosity that I'll never get to. But I thought, wow, that's a poet, because poets see that thing and they see it as a thing of beauty. Sees the outline of their body. Ever since he told me that, I'd look and I see the outline of the body, but still it's not that sense that he has.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that, I really love when people remind me of just how, yeah, I mean, what is poetry? It's like acknowledging it's acknowledging life and observing life in ways that are incredible, like just so present and so so present, and also with this giant big picture. And I love that about life. I love that this is the moment that I get to experience, and then I will die, I will decompose, I will go back to the earth, and then in 700 years or whatever, somebody will like pick a flower, and some part of that will have been when I was where I was. And I just love, there's something very freeing about knowing that this is all very temporary, and we're just a small part of a bigger picture. And that's something to, I feel like that's a very joyful thing for me to be able to think about.
And that's it for the latest episode of Songwriters on Process. Don't forget, you can find all of my interviews with over 200 songwriters on my Songwriters on Process website at songwritersonprocess.com, going all the way back to 2010. You can read them, watch them, or listen to them. So until next time, thanks for listening.